Kimbali was always alive, its streets filled with the sound of car horns, street vendors calling out, and the chatter of people chasing after dreams. In that city, everyone seemed to be in a hurry, carrying hopes as heavy as the loads on their backs. Among the many young workers fighting to survive was Chisomo, a woman whose eyes carried both struggle and determination. She woke up before the sun, often with nothing more than a cup of tea in her stomach, yet she dressed neatly, ready to face the day. For her, work was not just about money, it was about rewriting her family's story. Her parents had lived in poverty all their lives, and she believed she had been chosen to break that cycle. Whenever she looked at her younger siblings, she told herself, "I cannot fail." The city was harsh, full of competition and people willing to step on each other just to climb higher. But Chisomo believed in honesty and hard work. She wasn't perfect, but she carried herself with dignity, no matter how tough things got. Deep inside, she hoped that one day Kimbali would not just be a place of struggle for her, but the place where her dreams finally came true. Backhand index pointing right Kia AAP Chat Homain second outline a difficult workplace. BISI Terra expand Karka Likta John? Zenga Enterprises was one of the biggest firms in Kimbali City, a place where many dreamed of working because it promised good pay and a chance to grow. For Chisomo, getting the job there felt like a breakthrough, a chance to finally lift her family out of struggle. She walked into that office every morning with hope in her heart and determination in her steps. But soon she learned that the shine of Zenga Enterprises was only on the outside. Inside, it was a place where people worked under constant fear, especially because of Madame Njeri, the boss everyone respected publicly but feared privately. Madame Njeri was sharp, confident, and powerful, but with that power came cruelty. She had a way of speaking that cut deep, a way of making even the most hardworking staff feel small. For some reason, she seemed to have an unshakable dislike for Chisomo. No matter how many hours Chisomo put in, no matter how perfect her reports or how polite her manner, Madame Njeri always found a flaw. If Chisomo came early, she was told she looked desperate. If she stayed late, she was told she was slow. The harder she worked, the harsher the criticism became. Chisomo often found herself swallowing back tears during meetings when her boss mocked her in front of colleagues. At lunch breaks, she sometimes sat alone, pretending to be busy on her phone so no one would notice her pain. Some coworkers felt pity for her, but they stayed silent, afraid of becoming Madame Njeri's next target. Others even joined in the mockery, hoping to win Madame Njeri's favor. Still, Chisomo held on. She told herself that if she stayed patient, if she continued to give her best, things would eventually change. She dreamed of the day her efforts would finally be recognized. But deep down, a small voice whispered to her that the storm she was facing was only growing stronger, and one day, it would hit harder than she could imagine. Backhand index pointing right Kia AAP Chat Homain outline 3, the breaking point for 100 words, BISI. That morning started like any other. Chisomo came early, her files neatly arranged, her notes prepared for the staff meeting. She reminded herself as always to stay calm, to smile, and to ignore the sting of Madame Njeri's sharp words. But nothing could have prepared her for what was about to happen. The conference room was full, the long polished table lined with staff, the air heavy with tension. Everyone knew that Madame Njeri loved using meetings to display her power. She walked in wearing her usual elegant suit, heels clicking against the floor like a warning bell. Her eyes scanned the room, cold and sharp, and when they landed on Chisomo, the storm began. In front of everyone, Madame Njeri raised her voice, asking why a report was late, even though Chisomo had submitted it the day before. She didn't give her a chance to explain. Instead, she tore into her, calling her slow, careless, and finally, useless. The words cut deeper than knives. Laughter rippled faintly across the room from those too afraid not to join in, while others looked down at their papers, pretending not to hear. Chisomo sat frozen, her chest heavy, her hands trembling under the table. She wanted to defend herself, but her voice felt trapped in her throat. Then the final blow came. With a cold, dismissive tone, Madame Njeri said, "You are fired. Pack your things and leave my office today. I will not keep dead weight in this company." The silence that followed was deafening. Chisomo's heart sank, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. In that single moment, everything she had worked for seemed to vanish. Her colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some sneaking glances of pity, others relieved that it wasn't them in her place. Chisomo stood slowly, forcing herself to keep her back straight even though her world was collapsing inside. She gathered her files with shaking hands, every second feeling like an eternity. As she walked out of the meeting room, the silence in the room was louder than any shout. After Madame and Jerry's harsh words, no one dared to speak. Papers lay untouched on the table, pens tapped nervously, and eyes shifted quickly away from Chisomo, as though looking at her would put them in danger too. Some coworkers stared at their laptops, pretending to be busy, while others exchanged secret glances filled with pity. A few even smirked quietly, relieved that it was her and not them. But no one, not a single person, stood up for her. That was the cruelest part, the loneliness of it all. Chisomo felt her chest tighten as she forced herself to stand. Her hands shook while she picked up her notebook and pen, her only belongings on the table. She wanted to cry, to scream, to ask, "Why me?" But she held her head high because she knew if she let those tears fall here, Madame and Jerry would win completely. The humiliation burned inside her like fire, each second stretching into forever. She could feel the weight of every eye on her, some filled with judgment, others with silent fear. As she walked out of the room, her heels clicked against the floor in a rhythm that sounded more like heartbreak than footsteps. Her heart pounded in her ears, her throat tightened, but still she did not break. Behind her, the door closed with a dull sound, sealing in all the whispers that immediately began to spread. Some people whispered about how she had deserved it, others about how cold Madame and Jerry had been. But no matter what was said, one thing was certain: everyone would remember that moment. For Chisomo, it was not just losing a job. It was the sting of being torn down publicly, stripped of dignity in front of the same people she had once hoped would respect her. That wound cut deeper than poverty, deeper than failure. It carved a scar she knew she would carry forever, a reminder of how cruel people could be, and how strong she would have to become to rise again. Backhand index pointing right Kia AP chat Ho main outline 5, walking out A. The bright sun outside felt nothing like warmth to Chisomo. As she stepped through the glass doors of Zenga Enterprises, carrying only her small handbag and the weight of rejection, the world suddenly felt bigger, louder, and harsher. The noise of Kimbali's busy streets hit her all at once, car horns blaring, vendors calling out, footsteps rushing past. But to her it all sounded like a cruel reminder that life was moving on while she had been left behind. She stood still for a moment, staring at the tall building that had once been her dream workplace, now the place of her greatest humiliation. Her legs felt heavy, but she forced herself to keep walking, one step at a time. She had no plan. No money saved up to survive even a few weeks without work. All she had was the echo of Madame and Jerry's cruel words in her ears, words that tried to convince her she was worthless. Each step down the pavement felt heavier, her chest tight as though the city itself was pushing her down. She thought of her younger siblings waiting at home, of her mother who prayed for her every night, and the fear of disappointing them pierced her heart like a knife. Yet, in the middle of that storm inside her, a tiny flame refused to die. She stopped at the roadside, wiped her eyes quickly so strangers wouldn't see her weakness, and whispered to herself, "I will rise again." Her voice trembled, but her spirit meant every word. She didn't know how or when, but she believed that this moment, this walk of shame, would not be the end of her story. She lifted her chin, refusing to let her tears fall in public, and continued walking into the chaos of Kimbali, carrying nothing but pain, dignity, and a fragile hope that someday, the same city that broke her would witness her rise. Backhand index pointing right Kia AP chat. Ho main outline 6. A storm of gossip, 350 words. BISI style main leak done? By the next morning, the story of Chisomo's firing was already the hottest gossip at Zenga Enterprises. It slipped through the office corridors faster than paper carried by the wind. At the coffee station, in the copy room, even in hushed phone calls, people repeated the same tale. How Madame and Jerry had stood tall in the meeting room, her voice echoing like thunder, and how Chisomo had walked out with her head bowed. Some employees laughed about it, saying things like, "She should have known better than to cross Madame and Jerry." Others admired how bold the boss was, clapping their hands at her cruelty as if it was strength. But not everyone saw it that way. A few staff members, the quieter ones, whispered to each other about how unfair it had been. They remembered the look in Chisomo's eyes, the pain she tried so hard to hide, the dignity she refused to let go of even as her world collapsed. That image lingered in their minds far longer than Madame and Jerry's insults. In the silence of their own thoughts, many admitted to themselves that they would never have had the courage to walk out without breaking down. Outside the office, the gossip spread too. Former colleagues texted each other. "Did you hear what happened?" Social media pages whispered about a young woman fired in front of everyone. Some mocked her, calling her weak, while others admired her composure. In every version of the story, one truth remained clear. Chisomo had walked away without begging, without fighting, without letting her tears fall in front of those who wished her failure. Even in her absence, her quiet dignity spoke louder than any words. And though she didn't know it yet, that very dignity, the thing people thought was weakness, would become the seed of her greatest comeback. The same people gossiping about her shame would one day retell her story with awe, saying, "We saw her fall, but we also saw her rise." Backhand index pointing right Kia AAP chart, Ho main outline 7. The unexpected announcement, 350 to 400. Only a few days after Chisomo's painful exit, a new wave of whispers rolled through the halls of Zynga Enterprises. This time the gossip wasn't about her. It was about the company itself. The rumor was clear. Zynga Enterprises had been sold. No one knew the full details, but the story spread like fire. In the staff cafeteria, people leaned over their plates, lowering their voices as they speculated about who the mysterious new owner might be. Some imagined a foreign investor from Europe, others pictured a rich tycoon from Lagos or Nairobi. The curiosity was endless, and with it came both fear and excitement. Meetings became filled with uneasy chatter. Everyone knew a new owner meant change, and change could mean losing jobs. Yet in the middle of the panic, one person remained calm and arrogant, Madame and Jerry. She walked around with her usual confidence, her heels clicking proudly across the tiled floors. "It doesn't matter who buys this company," she told a group of employees one afternoon, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I am untouchable here. Whoever comes, they will need me to keep things in order." She smiled with satisfaction, as if her power was permanent. The staff nodded, but inside many of them wondered if that was true. Deep down, some hoped the rumors were real, that someone new would finally see past Madame and Jerry's facade and bring change. Others feared worse, imagining stricter bosses or heavier workloads. Yet one thing was certain: the air in Zynga Enterprises was no longer the same. Every knock on the office door, every unexpected meeting, every email alert made hearts beat faster. Little did they know, the winds of change were already blowing their way. A new chapter was about to begin, one that would turn everything upside down. And when the truth finally arrived, it would not only shock Madame and Jerry, but also rewrite the destiny of the woman she thought she had destroyed. Backhand index pointing right Kia AAP chart Ho main outline 8. A grand error. Monday morning came with a kind of tension the company had never felt before. The staff of Zynga Enterprises could hardly concentrate on their work. People gathered near the windows, whispering and speculating, their eyes darting toward the main gate every few minutes. Then just before 10 a.m., the sound of engines filled the air. A convoy of luxury cars rolled into the compound, their polished surfaces gleaming under the Kimbali sun. Gasps and murmurs spread like wildfire. "He's here! The new owner has arrived," someone whispered, and suddenly everyone was pushing to get a glimpse. The tall double doors at the entrance slowly opened, and silence fell over the crowd. In walked a man who carried himself with quiet authority. He wore a flowing African kaftan made of the finest fabric, embroidered with gold patterns that shimmered as the light hit them. His presence was magnetic, the kind that demanded respect without a single word spoken. This was Mr. Oba, the billionaire everyone had only heard about in rumors, now standing in front of them as the new owner of Zynga Enterprises. Employees straightened their clothes nervously, some bowing their heads in respect, others simply staring in awe. Even those who normally whispered and joked in the hallways were struck silent by his arrival. His confident steps echoed against the marble floor as he walked into the lobby, his face calm but unreadable. Behind him, his entourage carried briefcases and tablets, but no one outshone him. It was clear he was a man used to power, a man who knew he had the ability to change lives with a single decision. And indeed, lives were about to change. Whispers filled the air. What kind of man is he? Strict? Kind? Ruthless? Everyone wondered what future awaited them under his leadership. But one person in particular, Madame Njeri, adjusted her blazer and forced a smile, already planning how she would charm and impress the new boss. What she didn't know was that this arrival was not just. As Mr. Oba stepped further into the building, all eyes stayed glued to him, but then the real shock arrived. Behind him, walking gracefully with a calm expression, was his special advisor. At first, people blinked in disbelief, thinking their eyes were playing tricks. But no, it was her. Chisomo, the same woman who had been fired and humiliated in front of them only days ago, now walked into the company not as a worker, but as someone standing beside the new billionaire owner. Gasps filled the lobby. Some employees covered their mouths, whispering her name under their breath. Others exchanged looks of pure shock. A few who had laughed at her humiliation just days earlier now felt their throats tighten with regret. She was no longer the trembling young woman gathering her belongings in shame. Her back was straight, her steps were steady, and her eyes no longer carried the heaviness of tears. Instead, they held a quiet strength, the kind that made people stop and pay attention. Dressed elegantly, Chisomo looked like a woman transformed. She didn't gloat or smile arrogantly. She didn't even look at the people who had mocked her. Instead, she walked with the kind of calm dignity that spoke louder than 1,000 words. Every step she took was a reminder that life could turn tables faster than anyone could imagine. Madame Njeri, standing at the front, felt her heart pound in her chest. The color drained from her face, and for the first time in years her confidence faltered. Her eyes darted nervously between Mr. Oba and Chisomo, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. How could the woman she had fired so cruelly now stand beside the most powerful man in the building? The staff kept whispering, their voices filled with disbelief. She's back, but how? And though no one yet knew the full story, one thing was clear. Chisomo's return was not ordinary. It was destiny unfolding right before their eyes, and it left the entire company breathless. Backhand index pointing right Kia A. Madame Njeri had always been known for her boldness. She was the kind of woman who filled every room with her sharp words and proud laughter. But in that moment, when her eyes met Chisomo standing confidently beside Mr. Oba, all of that pride vanished. Her face turned pale, her lips trembled, and for the first time, the woman who never feared anyone looked shaken. She tried to steady herself, adjusting her blazer as if fixing her clothes could fix the storm inside her. But her hands betrayed her, trembling slightly as she struggled to keep her composure. The staff watched closely, their shock nearly as strong as hers. Just days ago they had seen Chisomo walk out in humiliation, holding back tears. Now here she was, walking back into the same building not as a victim, but as the special advisor to the new billionaire owner. Whispers filled the air like buzzing bees. She's back, but how? Some said in disbelief. Others simply stared, their mouths half open, unable to process what they were witnessing. Madame Njeri's mind raced. She remembered her cruel words in the meeting room, how she had mocked Chisomo and fired her in front of everyone. She had thought that was the end of the young woman's career, a lesson to anyone who dared to displease her. But now, standing before the same employees, Chisomo had returned in a position of power, and Madame Njeri realized too late that she had underestimated her. When Mr. Oba introduced his advisor with respect, every pair of eyes turned to Chisomo. She didn't smirk, she didn't gloat, she didn't even look at Madame Njeri. Instead, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her silence more powerful than any words. That was what cut Madame Njeri the deepest. The woman she had tried to destroy had not only risen, she had risen higher than Madame Njeri could ever reach. And now, in front of everyone, her own pale face told the story. The throne she thought was secure was slipping right out of her hands. Backhand index pointing right Kia AAP chat homai. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioner. Every eye was fixed on Mr. Oba as he stood tall at the front, his voice calm yet commanding. Then he turned slightly, gesturing toward Chisomo. "This woman," he said firmly, "will help me lead this company. Her integrity and strength are the reasons I trust her." His words cut through the silence like lightning, leaving the room stunned. For a moment no one moved. It was as though time itself had stopped. Then slowly a wave of applause began. First hesitant claps from a few hands, then louder, stronger, until the entire room filled with the sound. The same people who had once watched Chisomo walk out in shame now stood clapping for her with admiration. Some faces showed guilt, Others awe, but all of them understood one thing. The tables had turned completely. Chisomo stood gracefully, not smiling too widely, but her eyes shone with quiet pride. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence, her dignity, and the respect in Mr. Oba's voice were enough to silence every doubt, every insult that had ever been thrown at her. Madame Njeri, however, could barely keep her composure. Her hands clenched tightly at her sides as the applause thundered around her. The very employees she had ruled over with fear were now cheering for the woman she had tried to destroy. The humiliation that once belonged to Chisomo now hung over her like a heavy shadow. Some staff exchanged looks, remembering the cruel words Madame Njeri had spoken during that painful meeting. Others whispered to themselves, amazed at how life had flipped so quickly. The very woman called useless was now being honored as a leader. In that moment, Chisomo didn't just reclaim her dignity. She became a symbol of resilience for everyone watching. Her story was living proof that no matter how low someone is pushed, with faith and integrity, they can rise again. And as the applause roared on, the message was clear. The tables had truly turned. For the first time in years, Madame Njeri struggled to find her voice. The woman who had once commanded every meeting with fire in her words now stood before her staff, pale and uneasy. Her lips trembled as she opened her mouth, trying to cover her shame with an apology. I may have been too harsh," she stuttered, her words weak and broken. She glanced quickly at Chisomo, then at Mr. Oba, hoping to soften the weight of her actions. But the room did not feel sorry for her. The same employees who had once watched her humiliate Chisomo were now watching her stumble. No one clapped. No one nodded in understanding. They simply stared, their faces unreadable, their silence louder than any response. For them, her apology came too late. Everyone remembered the cruelty in her voice the day she fired Chisomo, the way she had stripped her of dignity without a second thought. No excuse could erase that memory. Chisomo stood quietly at Mr. Oba's side, her calm presence making Madame Njeri's shame feel even heavier. She did not smirk, she did not interrupt. She simply let the moment play out, her silence showing more strength than anger ever could. The staff couldn't help but admire her restraint. It was a victory that needed no gloating. Madame Njeri's hands twisted nervously as she muttered, I only wanted the best for this company. But even she knew her words sounded hollow. The respect she once commanded was gone. The fear she had used to control people had vanished. In its place stood an uncomfortable truth. She was no longer the powerful woman she believed herself to be. The tables had turned completely. Where once she had stood tall over Chisomo, now she stood small before her. And as the silence of the staff weighed down the room, everyone understood one thing. Madame Njeri's era of fear was over, and nothing she said could bring it back. Backhand index pointing right Kia AAP chat Ho main outline 13. The sweet victory of dignity 350 to 400 words. BISI emotional or viral style may. All eyes turned to Chisomo waiting for her to react. Some expected her to laugh at Madame Njeri's downfall. Others thought she would use the chance to throw back the same cruel words once spoken to her. But Chisomo did none of that. She stood tall, her face calm, her voice steady as she spoke. Respect people no matter their position, she said softly, her words cutting through the silence. Life can change in a moment. The room grew still. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that no one could ignore. Those simple words struck deeper than any insult could. They reminded everyone of what they had witnessed, how quickly the tables had turned, how the woman they once pitted was now standing in a place of honor. It wasn't revenge that made Chisomo shine in that moment. It was her grace. Some employees felt their eyes sting with tears, realizing how wrong they had been to stay silent during her humiliation. Others looked down, ashamed of the times they had joined in the gossip. And yet, instead of bitterness, Chisomo gave them a lesson in dignity. She didn't need to raise her voice or point fingers. Her calm strength spoke louder than anger ever could. Madame Njeri shifted uncomfortably, her face still pale. She had expected mockery, maybe even punishment, but instead she was met with mercy. That mercy hurt more than any revenge, because it revealed the smallness of her cruelty compared to the greatness of Chisomo's heart. Mr. Oba nodded with pride, his face showing deep respect for his advisor. The staff broke into quiet applause, not just for the new leadership, but for the woman who had turned pain into wisdom. In that moment, Chisomo's victory wasn't about a new title or power. It was about showing that dignity, kindness, and resilience were stronger than cruelty. And that kind of victory was sweeter than anything else. Backhand index pointing right kia AAP chat. Ho main outline 14. A new beginning for all 350 to 400 words. BISI Terra leak done? Under the new leadership of Mr. Oba, with Chisomo by his side, Zenga Enterprises began to feel like a completely different place. The fear that once hung in the air slowly disappeared. Employees who used to walk into the office with heavy hearts now came with renewed energy, ready to give their best. For the first time in years, workers felt valued. Their voices mattered in meetings, their efforts were noticed, and their hard work was rewarded. The change wasn't only in the company's numbers, but in the smiles of the people who worked there. Chisomo, who had once been humiliated in front of them, now became a living example of what resilience could achieve. Her story spread through the city of Kimbali like wildfire. People spoke of her not just as a company leader, but as a symbol of hope, proof that rejection can sometimes be the very doorway to destiny. Young women admired her courage, parents told their children about her strength, and workers in every corner of the city reminded each other, do not look down on anyone. Tomorrow might surprise you. Even inside the office, her presence inspired a quiet shift. Those who had mocked her now treated others with kindness, afraid of repeating Madame and Jerry's mistake. Gossip faded into respect, and fear was replaced with teamwork. Chisomo did not carry herself with arrogance. She walked among the staff with humility, greeting them warmly, reminding them that true leadership was not about power but about lifting others up. Kimbali itself began to see Zenga Enterprises in a new light. What was once known as a harsh workplace was now spoken of as a place of opportunity and growth. And at the center of that transformation was Chisomo, the woman who had turned pain into strength and shame into triumph. Her story reminded everyone that life could change in a heartbeat, and sometimes the very stone thrown to break you becomes the foundation of your rise. Backhand index pointing right kia AAP chat Ho main outline 15. The story that echoed 350. Across Kimbali, the story of Chisomo spread like fire. In marketplaces, bus stops, and even in small cafes, people whispered the same line with wide eyes. The woman they fired returned as the hand of the new owner. It was a tale that carried both shock and inspiration, a reminder that destiny often works in ways no one expects. Parents repeated her story to their children at night, teaching them to never give up, no matter how unfair life seemed. Young workers struggling in harsh jobs found hope in her journey. They looked at their own battles differently, believing that their turn could come too. Even those who had laughed at Chisomo's downfall now carried her example in their hearts, feeling the sting of guilt, but also the spark of change. What made her story powerful wasn't just her return to the company, but the way she carried herself. She never allowed bitterness to rule her. She showed the city that dignity, patience, and faith could achieve more than anger ever could. Her rise was not about revenge. It was about proving that respect and humility are the true marks of strength. And so, Chisomo's name became more than just a name in Kimbali. It became a lesson, a proverb, a warning, and a hope all at once. People would say with pride, never underestimate the dignity of a humble heart. Backhand index pointing right up AAP chat. Ho main pura 15 outline ka script ek jaga compile karka. Ek 4000 word ka complete emotional script bana done.